Time to enjoy some ancient Roman silver that isn't exactly Roman. What do I mean by this? You see, the Roman Empire was enormous. The Mint of Rome simply wasn't able to produce enough coins to meet the demands for cash in such a huge territory. Not only that, but this was a very diverse empire. The Romans conquered lots of different peoples, and many of them had been using coins for a long time before the Romans themselves even began striking their own money. That means Rome found itself ruling over territories that had already been using their own highly complex monetary systems for a long time. And instead of wiping out these old systems, risking an instant crisis of trust on whatever new money Rome wanted to impose to these regions, Rome instead decided to be pragmatic and continue the coinage tradition of their new subjects. This is what today's video is all about. Let's have a look at some of these lovely Roman provincial silver coins. So to understand the provincial silver, we need to understand the curious phenomena that the Roman Empire, for most of its history, had multiple different monetary systems operating within its territories at the same time. For example, you had a closed monetary system operating exclusively in Egypt. You had another system for the very commercially busy frontier province of Syria. Each province that issued silver deserves its own video, frankly, as some of their local monetary systems are nearly as complex and fun to collect as the imperial standard. But to get a basic overview, a basic grasp of how so many different systems worked side by side, we can think about this idea of Roman money in this large empire-wide sense as a three-tiered system with imperial, provincial, and civic coins. I've picked 3 coins here to illustrate this. They were all issued under the same emperor, Antoninus Pius, who reigned in the mid-2nd century AD, and what we're having a look at is an imperial coin, a provincial coin, and a little bronze civic coin. Imperial coins were those issued in the central imperial monetary standard, by the imperial mints, those controlled directly by the emperor. And these were the closest to what a universal coin would be. Just like with anything in history, there are a few exceptions to it, but in broad terms, if you had a denarius like this, and you went anywhere on the empire, it meant you had money. You could use this coin as it is to buy pretty much anything, anywhere within the empire's borders. If you went to a region like Cilicia, where they had their own silver coins, that's where the other silver coin I'm showing you in this explanation comes from. If you brought a denarius to any market in the region, they would have had an official equivalence table to what a denarius was worth in relation to the local coins. The discovery of treasures in the provinces that mixed local silver coins with imperial denarii indicates this was a reality pretty much everywhere around the empire. Certain provinces were then allowed to issue their own provincial silver coins. That would be like the second tier. This was not a casual permission. Only the most important cities were allowed to produce their own silver coins, and the issue of these coins was not a permanent concession. It was more of a specific permission given by the emperor for a specific time period and for a specific purpose. So here, for example, we have this large silver tetradrachma. This coin was issued at a city called Mopsos, and this coin was made for some specific reason that was in the interests of the large imperial administration. Maybe this coin was made because the region needed to issue high-value coins to facilitate trade. The local administrators might have asked the emperor to produce silver because they lacked enough coins to monetize the economy. That on itself would have made sense because Cilicia had very active trade routes passing through it. It could also have been used to pay for military expenses. By far, the military was the biggest expense the empire had. We know that, for example, when the time this coin was made, Antoninus Pius managed to avoid conflict between the Romans and the Parthians. But even in his peaceful reign, he had to keep entire legions stationed in the east to keep the Parthians in check. So this coin could have been part of an issue produced to pay for military expenditure at this particular region. Either maybe to pay soldiers directly or to pay for the logistics involved in maintaining a military presence in the east. Provincial silver coins were meant to circulate, as the name implies, at the province level. Maybe they were also accepted in the neighboring provinces. They did not follow the imperial monetary standard. Here, for example, this coin is a descendant of the Hellenistic system from the Greek kings that ruled the area and issued coins in their own previous systems before the Romans conquered the area. Now, silver is silver. You as a merchant, you could perfectly bring this coin from Cilicia to Rome and you would have had real, tangible money in your hands. But unlike a denarius, which you could bring to a market in Cilicia and just spend it, when you brought something like this to Rome, you would have had to exchange it at an argentarius, a banker, for Roman imperial money. And you would have to pay a fee in this transaction because these coins were not accepted as money in markets that operated at the imperial standard. That's why I would consider this coin to be like at a secondary tier of importance. And finally, on the third tier, we have civic coinage. These tend to be clumped together with the silver coins at auction catalogs, being given like this name of like provincial coins as well. But that's not entirely correct. There were some bronze coins that were provincial in nature, but the vast majority are what is called a civic coin or a municipal coin. This means these coins were made for circulation at the local level. Being bronze, they had very little individual value. They served mostly for local commerce. And therefore, the imperial administration was much more generous with giving authorization for cities to issue their own civic coins. As the name implies also, they were meant to be very local in their use. This tiny little bronze we have here was meant to be used at the city of Bostra, a city that was near the modern frontier between Lebanon and Syria. And it was only meant to be used where it was originally made, and that's about it. If you brought this coin to the city where the previous coin was made, thousands of miles away, people would certainly look at you funny and say that what you had there was a pretty little coin, but sadly, your money was no good there. If you wanted to travel from one region to another, you had to take silver with you. Before leaving, you had to exchange probably like multiples of these for a silver coin first and take the silver coin with you to that other region. Because at the end of the day, precious metals were money. So we can, in a certain way, think of these bronze coins as more like tokens of value rather than money. Okay, so now that we know where exactly do the provincial silver coins fit within the larger scope of Roman money, let's begin with what I would say is the most important provincial mint, Antioch. Antioch was the capital of Roman Syria, and it was enormous. It was a metropolis. It might have had as much as like 300 to 500,000 people at its height in the 2nd century AD, making it the third largest city in the empire. And it was the great commercial nexus that connected the Roman Mediterranean and the trade routes that went to the Far East. It was also one of the great military headquarters from which Rome launched its armies against the Persians and other eastern enemies. Antioch consumed money at a ferocious rate. Trade was very active, and Syria always had entire legions stationed at its borders, which created this very heavy demand for coin. Numismatically speaking, the coin issues of Antioch were closely connected to Rome's military campaigns. If an emperor waged a big war on the east, think about like Vespasian during the Jewish revolt, Trajan or Caracalla during their wars against the Parthians, they had to produce tons of coins locally to pay for the campaign, and almost always Antioch was chosen as the city to mint these coins. What I find very curious is that the very first coins of Antioch under Roman rule, they actually kept the Greek style of one of its last Greek kings, the Seleucid king Philippus Philadelphus. You have an example on your screen now. This coin I'm showing you is a posthumous tetradrachma issued by the Romans right after annexing the region. And as you can see, the coin is indistinguishable from an earlier Greek piece. There are no signs of any Roman designs in this coin. We have on the obverse the portrait of the king, and on the reverse a large image of Zeus sitting on his throne with legends proclaiming Philip's regnal name, despite the man having been dead for a few decades after this coin was made. It's interesting also to note that the Seleucid tetradrachma, when this coin was made, had already declined in weight compared to its theoretical standard. It also had declined in fineness of the silver. Therefore, these coins did not begin as the coins under Rome did not begin as this fresh, reformed coinage. They were more like a direct continuation of a system sort of already in monetary decline that the Romans basically inherited and they just had to work with. And to have an example of a Roman coin of this region, let me switch to a much later tetradrachma. This one was issued under Caracalla in the early 3rd century AD. Couple of interesting things to note here. Mainly the continuity. The coins remained Greek in language. They remained a Greek denomination. This too is a tetradrachma. The only change, really, the significant change, it's in its imagery. Roman provincial coins often borrowed the visual logic of the imperial denarius, with the emperor's portrait on the obverse, his regnal name, and the official titles around it. Although in this case, as I mentioned, we have it in Greek, so it's like a translation from the denarius. We can read Autokratoros, Kaisaros, Antoninos, Sebastos, which is par on par a Greek translation to what you could find in Caracalla's denarii. The style is also different. If we compare this portrait to that of a coin made in Rome, we can see that this coin is the fruit of a local die engraver. The reverses of these coins also had an imperial aspect to it. Provincial silver was very different visually to the bronzes produced in whichever region we're looking at. Most bronze coins often remained far more local in their imagery, since they were, of course, meant for local use only. The silver, by contrast, had a more state-facing role, which actually fits. It fits its role as a coin meant to circulate all over the eastern provinces. Think about it. Since it had to circulate across a broader region, it had to pay for troops. So the reverses, for example, they lean much more heavily into the language of Roman power. And few symbols are more characteristic of Roman power than the eagle, which is almost boring in its repetition. It's actually, personally, a breath of fresh air when you come across an Antioch silver that does not have an eagle. But hey, this was the symbol associated with Rome, so it made sense to use it. The legends are, once again, bang on, a translation of what you could find on a denarius. It proclaims Caracalla's 4th term with tribunician powers. Leaving Antioch, we head south to Egypt. By the time Egypt was formally annexed by Augustus within the Roman sphere in 30 BC, it was, a pale shadow of its former glorious self under the early Ptolemaic kings. The last Ptolemies survived more as client kings of Rome than compared to anything else. Here we have one of the last coins of Ptolemaic Egypt before its fall. This is a tetradrachma, once more, issued under the famous Cleopatra. It didn't have her face on it, actually. What we see here is the bust of Ptolemy I, the founder of the dynasty. And as you can see from this dark gray look on this coin, it's not like this coin had much silver in it. It actually only had around 30% silver content, showing just how bad of an economic position the kingdom was during her reign. Given this particular coin has a thick black patina over it, which hides its actual grayish tone, but even when this coin was brand new, having only 30% silver means it would have had this dull gray color to it, rather than the shiny metallic gray that pure silver typically has. The reverse of these coins often shows the eagle, another symbol of the Ptolemies, which can be traced back all the way to the first Egyptian coins from Ptolemy I. Nice little eagle here, dominating the central part of the design. The legends around it read Ptolemaio Basileus of King Ptolemy. I mean, I love like the black, dark, kind of dirty look of this coin. It generates this contrast between the very regal symbol of one of Alexander the Great's successors, but in this like dark, corrupted theme of this kingdom in decadence. I love this coin. And I mean, if we look at all the Roman commentators from the time when they talk about Egypt, they talk about it under this light of this venerable nation under this majestic dynasty. But sadly, in the 1st century BC, it was by then corrupted after centuries of bad kings and bad leadership. Now, Cleopatra, to her immense credit, was not content to accept this diminished role. Through her alliances, first with Caesar and then with Mark Antony, she tried to recover something of Egypt's old political weight and present the Ptolemaic monarchy as a power that could still stand alongside Rome in the Eastern Mediterranean, rather than being this like inferior partner. But in the end, that project collapsed with Antony's defeat, Cleopatra's death, and Octavian's annexation of Egypt, which turned the last great Hellenistic kingdom into yet another Roman province producing Roman provincial coins. So let's have a look at a Roman provincial coin issued in Egypt. What we have here is yet another tetradrachma. This one was made under Hadrian, around the year 138 AD. Here we can see that the Romans carried on with Egypt's tradition of low-quality silver coins. Well, we can't really call these silver, they're billion in reality. One of Hadrian's denarius, at this time some 3.4 grams of fairly high quality, 90% silver, one of these coins was exchanged for a whole tetradrachma like this one you're seeing, which weighs a respectable 12, 13 grams, but only has like 20% silver in it, maybe less. As we can see here, the visual formula is similar to that of the Antioch tetradrachma. We have a portrait of the emperor and legends similar to that of the denarius, but in Greek language. The legends read Autokratoros, Kaisaros, Traianos, Hadrianos, Sebastos. Just like a denarius of the time, which would have Imperator Caesar, Traianus, Hadrianus, Augustus. What calls my attention to these coins are the portraits. The portraits in Egyptian coins are super curious. The quality of the portraiture is all over the place. Issues, for example, under Hadrian are remarkably diverse in its style. This one is actually particularly good. It's not the best. Some are really impressive works of art, but it's still quite recognizable as we can see it is Hadrian. If you're used to his portraits, you can see this looks like Hadrian. However, I'm going to put on the screen some of his later issues, and as we can see, I don't know, something must have happened with the mint workers. Maybe the good engravers from the early reign retired, or they let some interns cut the dice, because his late coins, they look horrible. But in any case, heading to the reverse of our piece here, that's another cool part. Egyptian coins are very diverse on the reverses, often showing local Egyptian symbols. They also show Ptolemaic symbols, local pharaonic symbols from the local Egyptian culture. It's a really fascinating mishmash of cultural influences. In the case of this particular coin here, we have the image of Pronoia. That's what's written around the goddess, the Greek incarnation of Providence, holding a scepter, indicating her power over the mortal sphere of the man looking at this coin, and she has on her outstretched hand a phoenix. Now, that's cool. The phoenix represents this idea of renewal, of the cycles of natural life. And this Greek goddess was linked to the Egyptian solar cycle, the native Egyptian cycle, meaning Here she communicates this concept of like a new era, that the emperor, that Hadrian, was bringing new beginnings to Egypt. And finally, to her left, we have 3 letters, which represent like the date, the emperor's regnal year, when this coin was made. Most Romano-Egyptian coins were dated, and that's how we can pinpoint, for example, this coin to a specific year, 138 AD. So, shall we keep going? For our next province, we have Cappadocia. Before the Roman conquest, this was a Hellenistic kingdom located in central Anatolia. Just so you have like a context of where it is. The region is like this plateau on what is modern-day Turkey. The wider Anatolian peninsula, like the entire peninsula that is Turkey today, it has like this very treacherous terrain. If you look at ancient maps of the region, you see that the majority of the cities, they were either right at the coastline in the west, or in like the few flatter areas on the western and southern parts of the peninsula. Yeah, like the north, the south, and the west, you see that the cities, they would hug the coastline. But as you go like to the interior and the east of the peninsula, this area is like incredibly mountainous. But it is also very strategic. That's the point. It connected by land the Middle East and its trade routes to the frontiers of the Roman Empire. And it also gave access to the rest of Europe and the Mediterranean. So this region of Cappadocia served as like a last checkpoint between east and west, right next to these dangerous mountains that any army or trade caravans had to inevitably cross to go from one part of the known world to the other. So being this checkpoint, Cappadocia became this place where everyone would stop and everyone would spend money at. And before the arrival of Rome, the Greek kings of Cappadocia capitalized on this strategic position. They were surprisingly rich, and they issued lots of drachma as their main silver coinage. What you're seeing right now is a Greek Cappadocian drachma from right before the Roman conquest. Interestingly, compared to the previous examples from Antioch and Alexandria, the Romano-Cappadocian coins were actually of pretty high quality silver, nothing like the Antioch or Egyptian issues which had lots of copper added to its alloy mix. The coins from this province are very unique. It's not like the Romans kept the monetary system exactly as it was. They made lots of different multiples and fractions of the drachma, ranging from the half drachma up to the 3 drachma. Frankly, the reasons for making so many different denominations escapes me, but once again, the issues at Cappadocia are tightly connected to military campaigns on the eastern frontiers of the empire. Here on your screen we have a nice example. This is a D drachma, so a 2 drachma coin, weighing a respectable 6.5 grams of silver at around 70% purity, issued for Marcus Aurelius. Marcus and his co-emperor Lucius Verus, they made lots of coins in Cappadocia, showing this was likely the chosen staging ground for the Roman troops before retaking Armenia from the Parthians. That was the famous campaign Lucius Verus went on before dying from the plague. Design-wise, I know I'm repeating myself here, but this is yet again a very denarius-looking coin. In fact, you know what? This coin is too denarius-like. The other 2 provincial coins I've shown you previously, they had at least like very distinctive engraving styles. They were clearly made by provincial die engravers. For Cappadocia, however, we see this interesting phenomenon. It looks like the dies for these coins were either made in Rome, because the style, I mean, just look at this coin, it's super similar to that of the coins made at the Rome Mint. And who knows, probably these coins were produced at Rome and shipped to Cappadocia. So it was either that, the coins were made in Rome and shipped to Cappadocia, or at least the dies were made in Rome by Roman engravers, sent to Cappadocia, and then they were used there to strike local silver. So here in this obverse we have the very characteristic portrait of Marcus Aurelius with his long, famous philosopher beard. This must be a somewhat early issue during his reign, because he actually looks relatively young here. I mean, look at it. His beard isn't that long compared to his last coins, And the fact that he doesn't wear any laurel crown in this portrait makes him like a bit like a boy, or at least like less regal, less emperor-like, at least in my opinion. I don't know about it. It might have been just like a stylistic choice on the engraver's part, but in any case, here we have the legends as well, once again in Greek, and it reads Autokratoros, Marcos, Antonenos, Sebastos. Basically a different translation from Imperator Marcus Antoninus Augustus. On the reverse, we have some very brief inscriptions. Upatos, meaning consul, so advertising one of Marcus Aurelius's official positions back in Rome. And dominating the image on the reverse, we have the image of Mount Argaios. This is the most common image on Cappadocian silver. It's this enormous mountain that dominated the landscape around Caesarea, the capital of the province. So it was the most obvious local image to put on the coins. There are quite a few variations, but the formula is somewhat the same. It's this stylized emblem of the mountain, usually like a steep conical peak. Sometimes you also have it like over an altar with a star above the summit, or in some issues like a standing figure such as Helios on top. Other varieties add like small details like trees, an animal at the base, or several stars. The point of the type was to turn the mountain into like a compact symbol of Cappadocia itself, and of course because it was an important symbol for the local religious rites. Alright, I've just mentioned the three main provincial mints that struck silver during the imperial period, and probably like the vast majority of provincial coins you will come across, because these were the most prolific and the ones, like the cities that issued coins for the largest number of years. But there were many other provinces that had their own smaller production runs of silver, and it's worth to mention at least one of them. Here we have a coin issued at the famous city of Ephesus, on the western shores of Asia Minor. This is a Christophorus, worth 3 Roman imperial denarii. This particular issue was made for Emperor Augustus between 25 and 20 BC. If the other provincial coins on the obverse, they were like translations or reinterpretations from Roman denarius, this is literally like a copy from the contemporary imperial coins. We have this young, fresh portrait of the emperor without like any laurel crowns or anything, just his face, so you could clearly see who was the man and what he looked like, and in Latin, an Imperator Augustus at the bottom. Fairly simple, and I mean, it's so interesting, right? The legends for this coin are in Latin rather than Greek, despite this being a coin made in yet another Greek-speaking region. Heading to the reverse, we have this lovely laurel crown bordering the design, and at the center, his name, Augustus. Fairly straight to the point. Next to the legends, we have a Capricorn, the zodiac symbol Augustus identified the most with. Despite he himself not being a Capricorn, he was a Libra, but he wanted his reign to be remembered for the characteristics of the sign. Seriousness, authority, wisdom. You know what? That's actually my astrological sign. I'm a Capricorn. How cool. And with the Capricorn, we have a tiny little cornucopia. The cornucopia was the legendary horn of abundance. It was the universal symbol of abundance. Legends said that out of this horn, there would be like this endless stream of like fruits, grain, all kinds of delicious food eternally flowing out of it. And for comparison, here we have an example of what the original Christophorus looked like before the arrival of Rome. This denomination was created by the kingdom of Pergamon that controlled the entire region and established their coin as the standard large silver coin for this area. Lots of different cities in the region made Christophorus. Its design was quite unique. On the obverse, we would have the Cista Mystica, a sacred basket with a serpent emerging from it. This was related to a local cult of Dionysus. And on the reverse, typically there would be like a bowl case, also flanked by snakes. The annexation of the kingdom of Pergamon was quite easy for the Romans. For much of the Hellenistic period, Pergamon was one of Rome's closest eastern allies. And when the last king of Pergamon died, he just left his kingdom to Rome. So after Rome absorbed the region and organized it as the province of Asia, as with the other provinces, it did not abolish the Sistophorus. But as we saw from the Augustus piece, it simply adapted its iconography to, once again, fit Rome's propaganda machine. The Sistophorus was very long-lived. It was first created around 168 BC, that's when the first one is dated, and it survived well into the Roman Imperial age, lasting through at least the final main issues, like the final numerous issues that were made under Hadrian, but there was even like a brief revival under Caracalla in the 3rd century AD. This gives like a lifespan of the denomination of nearly 4 centuries, or about 3 centuries if we count only the continuous production period. So a fairly significant coin. And here we have it, a small tour over the interesting world of Roman provincial silver coins. Now, I've just skimmed the surface of this niche. There's just so much to collect and study on provincial coinage that is really fascinating. Now, I want to know about you. Do you have a Roman provincial silver coin? If you do, let us know in the comment section down below. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.